Tonight every virus on Earth disappears. Not just the dangerous ones. Every single virus vanishes from existence. The flu disappears. Common colds become impossible. But so do the countless helpful viruses your body has relied on since birth. Your immune system faces an empty world, with no targets left to chase. Defensive cells begin to turn inward. Before we dive into this sterile world, drop a comment about where you're listening from. If you enjoy these thought experiments, consider subscribing. These late-night journeys into scientific what-ifs are meant to be shared. The first changes begin now. A woman reaches for her coffee mug. Her fingers refuse to close around the handle. The joints have swollen overnight, far beyond normal size. She stares at her hands. Yesterday, these same fingers typed emails and opened jars. Now the knuckles bulge like small balloons filled with heat. Her knees throb with each heartbeat. Standing becomes an experiment in balance as the joint capsules fill with fluid. Walking to the bathroom requires gripping furniture for support. Blood tests reveal inflammatory markers at levels the lab technician has never recorded. These levels usually build over time in severe cases. Her immune cells have redirected their full intensity against her own cartilage in hours. Down the hospital hallway, a marathon runner discovers his ankles have locked in place. The tissue around each joint burns with concentrated heat. His muscles feel as if they're dissolving from the inside as the cells misread healthy fibers. A teacher touches her throat and feels hard lumps around her thyroid. The gland pulses with pain each time she swallows. Her own white blood cells begin consuming the organ that regulates her metabolism. T cells that once tracked viral proteins now strike at healthy tissue. Their precision slips. Swollen joints refuse to bend. The familiar smell of peanut butter fills the kitchen. A young boy takes his first bite of lunch. His throat begins closing before he can swallow. His lips swell outward like small pillows. The skin around his eyes puffs until he can barely see. His mother watches his breathing turn shallow and rapid. This same sandwich had been his favorite lunch for years. Yesterday, he ate it without a reaction. Now his airway narrows with each passing minute as his body treats the familiar protein like poison. Parents across the globe discover children gasping after eating foods that once felt safe. A slice of cheese sends a toddler into respiratory distress. A single strawberry makes a teenager's face swell beyond recognition. Emergency rooms stock epinephrine injectors in quantities they never expected to use. Paramedics respond to calls where ordinary meals become medical emergencies. A woman who lived with cats for years suddenly cannot breathe in the same room. Seasonal pollen that once caused minor sniffles now sends people to emergency departments. Airways tighten fast. Immune systems push maximum force at harmless proteins floating through spring air. The body's defenses can't keep scale anymore. Every exposure becomes a crisis. Children who could eat anything become prisoners in their own kitchens. A businessman sits down for his usual breakfast. The first spoonful of cereal triggers immediate cramping. His abdomen twists like something alive is moving inside. The pain starts as a dull ache around his navel. Within minutes, it spreads in waves that make him double over. His intestines feel raw and scraped with each movement. Liquid waste pours from his body in streams that won't stop. The toilet water shifts into strange colors. His gut bacteria, no longer held in check, multiply into colonies that consume everything in their path. The microbes that once helped digest food now reproduce without limit. They ferment nutrients into acids that burn through intestinal walls. Gas builds in pockets that stretch his abdomen until the skin feels ready to burst. A nurse discovers she cannot keep any food down. Everything she swallows comes back up mixed with bile. Her mouth tastes metallic. Office workers across the city abandon their desks as identical symptoms strike without warning. Bathroom stalls fill with people in sudden digestive failure. It starts with a single bite of familiar food. Bacterial colonies that once lived in balance now surge out of control. They consume not just nutrients, but the walls that contain them. The barrier between gut contents and bloodstream dissolves. Stomachs burn with acid that has nowhere to go. A pediatric nurse prepares routine immunization schedules. She stares at vaccination records that no longer protect anyone. The carefully documented immunity has simply evaporated. Children with complete vaccination series now test negative for antibodies they were expected to carry. Their immune memory cells drift through bloodstreams with nothing to hold on to. A mother brings her child for a wellness check. Blood tests reveal zero measles immunity despite perfect vaccination records. The antibodies that protected her child vanish along with the viruses that shaped them. Medical databases filled with immunization data become relics overnight. Careful prevention collapses as memory cells built for viruses lose their anchor. Public health officials discover that herd immunity math no longer fits. Vaccination schedules that protected communities for generations no longer mean what they did. Every chart starts to look like paper in a storm. A teenage girl who survived childhood cancer through careful immunization loses all acquired protection in a single night. Her rebuilt system reverts to the vulnerability of a newborn. Parents watch hard-won protection dissolve like sugar in rain. Antibodies stop showing up in blood work. Immunity certificates transform into worthless pieces of paper. A newborn baby lies in the hospital nursery. Her immune system tries to calibrate itself for the first time. Nothing provides the guidance it expects to find. White blood cells circulate through tiny vessels, searching for the viral teachers that should train them. They meet only silence where constant microscopic lessons once lived. Her developing immune system begins targeting her own red blood cells. The baby's skin turns yellow as destroyed cells accumulate faster than her liver can clear them. The nursery fills with newborns whose immune systems misfire in similar patterns. Deprived of training partners, their defenses turn aggressive against developing tissues. Tiny bodies strain under inflammation that protects nothing. Nurses record temperatures that spike with no infection to chase. The babies generate fever responses against threats that aren't there. Small bodies burn through energy on phantom alarms. A pediatrician examines blood samples and sees immune cells chewing at healthy tissue. The patterns don't match anything in the medical textbooks. These newborns are the first generation born into a world without viral teachers. The cellular education system that guided human development for ages has gone silent. Baby immune systems reach for instincts, then slip. Small bodies burn with fever that serves no purpose. Air grows thick with the smell of decay. A man sits on his bathroom floor at midnight. The porcelain feels cold against his fevered skin. His abdomen swells like a balloon filled with gas. Each breath pushes against organs that no longer fit. The bacterial colonies in his intestines surge since yesterday. Black liquid streams from his body in waves. The toilet water turns colors that don't exist in nature. Gas pockets stretch his abdomen until the skin feels ready to tear. A grocery store clerk discovers the same symptoms as she stocks shelves. Her intestines twist hard, trying to pull free. Office bathrooms across the city overflow with people in the same rebellion. The bacteria that once helped digest food multiply without pause. They consume everything in their path. The protective barrier between gut contents and bloodstream starts to fail. Stomachs burn with colonies that refuse to stop growing. A hospital room fills with patients covered in red welts. Their skin burns with infections that spread faster than treatment can reach them. The bedsheets stick to wounds that weep clear fluid. Bacteria that once hid in small populations now surge across human skin. A small scratch becomes a festering crater within hours. A construction worker touches a dirty surface. He watches infection climb his arm in red lines. His hand swells grotesquely. Nurses discover that standard infection control no longer works. Bacterial strains that previously caused minor irritation now trigger system-wide infections. A child's playground becomes a bacterial breeding ground. Parents watch minor scrapes transform into serious wounds. Bandages applied in the morning soak through with infected fluid by afternoon. Emergency departments run out of antibiotics. Patients arrive with skin that sloughs off in sheets. The bacterial explosion has turned every minor injury into a potential emergency. Wounds refuse to close under bacterial spread. A woman's toothbrush bristles turn black overnight. She stares at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The taste in her mouth resembles something that died. Her breath carries an odor so intense that coworkers step backward when she speaks. The bacterial colonies on her tongue multiply into thick mats. Her saliva turns acidic enough to burn her own gums. Dental offices report patients whose tooth enamel dissolves faster than repair. A teacher discovers her students recoiling when she leans over their desks. The bacteria in her mouth produce gases that trigger nausea in anyone nearby. Her tongue develops a coating thick enough to scrape off with a spoon. Office meetings become impossible as participants struggle with breath that contaminates enclosed spaces. Professional relationships collapse as people avoid face-to-face conversations. Masks become mandatory not for protection from illness, but to contain the stench from human mouths. Conversations end before they begin. A gynecologist's examination room fills with patients seeking emergency care. Women double over with pain that radiates from their pelvis. The examining table paper tears under hands that grip too tightly. Bacterial infections rage through reproductive systems that once maintained careful balance. A college student cancels her classes as burning pain makes walking impossible. Her body tries to flush out infection through discharge that soaks through protection. Women's healthcare clinics report waiting rooms filled with patients experiencing identical symptoms. A new mother watches her recovery stall as bacterial infections prevent normal healing. The microbes that should assist in tissue repair instead consume the very structures they once protected. Medical supply companies struggle to meet demand for treatments. The bacterial explosion transforms routine care into emergency medicine. Bodies rebel against their own protective systems. A bandage peels away from a paper cut to reveal an expanding crater. The small wound has grown since morning. Bacterial colonies feast on exposed flesh. A surgeon watches her patient's incision site deteriorate faster than tissue can regenerate. In the open cut, bacteria outpace the body's repair. Healthy tissue turns ragged at the edges. Surgical wounds that should heal in days remain open for weeks. The paper cut becomes a bacterial laboratory where unchecked microbes experiment with toxin production. A chef discovers that kitchen accidents now require emergency medical intervention. A small knife nick becomes a bacterial breeding ground. The infection spreads under healthy skin like underground tunnels. Hospital wound care units overflow with patients whose injuries refuse to heal. Nurses change dressings that soak through with infected fluid faster than replacement. Healing stops entirely as bacteria claim every wound. Simple cuts become permanent openings. A shower drain clogs with hair that moves on its own. The woman reaches down to clear the blockage. White threads spread between her fingers like living cotton. Fungal spores bloom across her bathroom tiles in patterns that pulse with each breath she takes. The moisture from her daily shower feeds colonies that expand overnight into carpets of fuzzy growth. Her lungs pull in air thick with reproductive particles that settle deep in her chest. The fungus spreads through her respiratory system like roots seeking water. Thread-like structures branch through lung tissue, converting healthy cells into feeding stations for continued growth. Her breathing becomes labored as fungal masses block airways that once moved air freely. A janitor discovers identical growths covering basement walls in office buildings across the city. The fungal colonies produce spores faster than air filtration systems can remove them. Workers inhale clouds of reproductive particles with each breath, seeding new infections in previously sterile lung tissue. Her toenails turn black as fungal infections burrow under protective layers that once kept microbes outside her body. The nail beds soften into mush that squeezes between her toes when she walks. Fungal threads penetrate through skin barriers that no longer receive viral protection. Medical imaging reveals lung cavities filled with cottony masses that expand with each passing day. The fungal colonies convert living tissue into spore-producing factories. Every exhaled breath carries infectious particles back into the room. Lungs bloom with colonies that breathe for themselves. Blood samples reveal organisms that swim in coordinated formations. A lab technician adjusts her microscope focus. The parasites move through red blood cells like schools of hungry fish. The microscopic invaders reproduce in her bloodstream at rates that overwhelm her immune system's ability to eliminate them. They consume red blood cells from the inside, leaving empty protein shells that collapse into useless debris. Her circulation becomes a feeding ground where parasites multiply faster than her bone marrow can replace destroyed cells. A tropical medicine specialist watches patient after patient arrive with identical blood films. The parasitic load would be rare in developed countries. The organisms that once competed with viruses for cellular resources now focus their full reproductive capacity on human hosts. Her vision blurs as parasites cross from her bloodstream into her brain tissue. They slip through barriers that no longer hold. The organisms establish colonies behind her eyes, feeding on nerve cells in the nutrient-rich environment. Children in daycare centers develop identical symptoms as intestinal parasites spread through populations. The microscopic worms burrow through digestive tract walls, establishing breeding colonies in organs that once enjoyed viral protection. Emergency rooms stock antiparasitic medications in quantities they never anticipated needing. Infections spread through communities like wildfire through dry grass. Routine blood work turns into discoveries of invasive species. Blood flows thick with passengers that refuse to leave. A chef's hands begin trembling while chopping vegetables. The knife slips between his fingers. His movements become jerky and unpredictable. Misfolded proteins spread through his brain tissue like corrupted software in a computer network. Each abnormal protein forces healthy molecules to adopt the same twisted configuration. Neural communication begins to stutter. His thoughts become fragmented as brain cells surrender their structure to invading protein templates. The infectious proteins require no DNA or reproduction cycle to spread their destruction. They simply touch healthy proteins and force them to misfold, converting normal brain tissue into factories for producing more corrupted molecules. His memory becomes unreliable as storage systems collapse under protein assault. A neurologist documents patients whose brain scans show expanding zones of tissue death that follow no viral or bacterial pattern. The protein infections spread through neural networks like dominoes falling in slow motion. His speech becomes slurred as proteins that control language processing adopt foreign configurations. Words that once flowed naturally now require conscious effort to form. His brain struggles with corrupted control systems. Hospital neurological units overflow with patients experiencing identical protein cascade failures. These infectious agents spread through populations that lack any evolved defense against misfolded molecule transmission. Thoughts dissolve into protein static that cannot be cleared. An emergency room empties as the last physician removes her stethoscope. Medical equipment sits unused on silent crash carts. The waiting area fills with patients who have nowhere else to turn. Physicians discover their training no longer applies to diseases that follow no familiar patterns. The antibiotics that once saved lives have no effect on fungal infections. Medications in their arsenal fail one after another. Their medical degrees become historical curiosities as treatment protocols collapse under the weight of unknown pathogens. A pediatrician watches children die from infections she cannot identify or treat. The standard medications that once cured common ailments now serve no purpose against invaders that operate outside established medical knowledge. Her prescription pad becomes meaningless paper as pharmaceutical solutions fail repeatedly. Hospitals discharge patients not because they recover, but because medical staff can offer no effective treatment. Novel pathogen combinations overwhelm human immune systems. The healthcare infrastructure crumbles as providers admit their complete inability to address the epidemic. Medical schools close their doors as professors realize their curricula no longer prepare students for reality. The accumulated knowledge of infectious disease treatment becomes obsolete overnight. Familiar pathogens disappear as unfamiliar ones multiply beyond control. Emergency departments transform into waiting rooms where sick people gather without hope of receiving effective treatment. The medical profession retreats from hospitals that become monuments to their helplessness against the pathogen invasion. White coats hang empty in closets that echo with silence. A museum curator collapses while cataloging preserved specimens. Dust from ancient collections settles on her exposed skin. Microbes that slept for centuries begin stirring in her bloodstream. Pathogens that once terrorized human populations before viral control systems evolved suddenly find defenseless hosts in modern bodies. The primitive diseases that killed entire civilizations reawaken to discover immune systems that lack any inherited memory of their existence. Her body becomes a laboratory where ancient plagues conduct new experiments. Archaeological sites release clouds of dormant spores that settle in the lungs of researchers. They breathe history without protection. The primitive pathogens that drove human evolution through selective pressure now face populations that never developed defenses against their assault mechanisms. Her lymph nodes swell with infections that predate modern medicine by thousands of years. The ancient diseases multiply in tissues that recognize neither their structure nor their methods of attack. Immune responses designed for contemporary threats fail completely against prehistoric invasion strategies. Permafrost melting in remote regions releases bacterial strains that infected woolly mammoths and early human settlements. The primitive pathogens, though, into a world where their natural viral enemies no longer exist to maintain ecological balance. Modern humans become test subjects for diseases that shaped early human evolution. Public health databases contain no treatment protocols for infections that disappeared from human experience before written history began. The ancient plagues resume their work with populations that evolved beyond their reach but can no longer defend against their return. History comes alive in blood that remembers nothing. A gardener pulls weeds that grow faster than she can remove them. The morning sun reveals vines that doubled in size overnight. Green tendrils wrap around fence posts like grasping fingers. Her garden hose cannot deliver water fast enough to satisfy plants that consume nutrients at unprecedented rates. Tomato vines surge upward beyond their support stakes, crushing nearby vegetables under their explosive growth. The soil depletes faster than she can replace it as roots spread in every direction seeking more resources. Ivy climbs her house walls with a speed that makes her step backward. The leaves unfurl so rapidly she can almost watch them expand in real time. Her flower beds disappear under aggressive ground cover that smothers everything in its path. A park maintenance crew discovers trees that add visible height each day. Branches extend beyond their normal seasonal patterns, reaching for space that belongs to neighboring plants. Root systems expand underground like geological surveys, cracking sidewalks and foundation walls as they claim territory. Her lawn mower blade dulls after single passes through grass that grows thick as carpet within hours of cutting. Cut it, and new blades crowd back within hours. Plants that once shared space peacefully now compete in blunt green competition. Garden centers run out of pruning shears as residents struggle to contain vegetation that refuses to respect property boundaries. The green explosion transforms suburban neighborhoods into jungles. Cultivated plants revert to wild growth patterns that overwhelm human control systems. Roots crack through concrete that stood for decades. Corn stalks bend under the weight of insects that cover every surface. A farmer walks through his field at dawn. The sound of chewing fills the air like rainfall. Caterpillars strip leaves from his crops faster than the plants can photosynthesize new growth. The insects move in coordinated waves across his fields, consuming everything green. Only bare stalks remain standing like biological skeletons. Clouds of flying insects block out patches of sky as populations explode beyond any natural limits. They reproduce in cycles measured in days rather than seasons. Each generation grows larger and more aggressive than the last. His pesticide applications have no lasting effect against numbers that replace losses faster than chemicals can eliminate them. A grocery store manager watches produce shipments arrive already damaged by insect feeding during transport. Fruits and vegetables show bite marks and tunneling damage. It renders them unsellable to consumers who expect unblemished food. His shelves empty as agricultural production collapses under insect pressure. Beehives overflow with aggressive insects that attack anything entering their expanded territory. The beneficial pollinators abandon their traditional roles to focus entirely on reproduction and resource competition. His orchard trees fail to produce fruit as pollination patterns collapse under insect chaos. Agricultural research stations document insect population explosions that follow no established ecological models. The insects that once faced viral population controls now multiply without restraint. They convert entire ecosystems into feeding and breeding grounds that prioritize insect survival over all other life forms. Leaves disappear faster than sunlight can replace them. Waves wash green foam onto beach sand that burns bare feet. A marine biologist collects water samples that glow in the morning light. The ocean surface writhes with algae that blocks all light below. Microscopic plants multiply in her water samples faster than she can count them under laboratory magnification. The algae reproduce without the viral controls that once maintained oceanic balance. Seawater turns into thick biological soup that suffocates everything beneath its surface. Her equipment clogs with organic matter that grows faster than mechanical filters can remove it. Fish float belly up along coastlines. Oxygen levels drop to zero under massive algal blooms that consume all available nutrients. The toxic plants produce chemicals that poison marine food chains, from microscopic organisms to large predators. Her research vessel cannot navigate through water thick enough to walk on. Tide pools become stagnant green puddles that smell like rotting vegetables mixed with industrial chemicals. Her protective gear cannot prevent skin irritation from exposure to contaminated seawater. Commercial fishing boats return to harbor with nets full of dead fish and algae rather than marketable catches. The oceanic food web collapses as primary producers overwhelm all other life forms. Their explosive reproduction consumes available resources faster than marine systems can process them. Coastal communities evacuate beaches that become toxic waste sites. Green death washes ashore in waves that burn exposed skin. It contaminates freshwater supplies through groundwater infiltration. The sea breathes poison with every tide. A shovel breaks against earth that has turned to concrete. A soil scientist examines dirt that crumbles like ash between her fingers. The ground beneath her feet feels hollow and unstable. Her soil samples reveal bacterial communities that produce acids instead of nutrients. Microbial populations spiral out of control without viral regulation. Underground ecosystems that once recycled organic matter now generate compounds that kill roots on contact. Her plants wither despite abundant water and sunlight. Tree roots shrivel and blacken as soil chemistry shifts beyond the tolerance of terrestrial plant life. The mycorrhizal networks that connected forest ecosystems collapse under bacterial damage. Her forest research plots become graveyards of dead vegetation. A farmer discovers his topsoil washing away in streams that run black with contaminated runoff. The soil structure that took decades to develop dissolves as organic bonds fail. His fields become moonscapes where nothing grows except resistant weeds. Underground water systems carry bacterial toxins into wells that once provided clean drinking water for rural communities. Soil filtration that purified groundwater for thousands of years fails as microbial communities turn purification into contamination. Agricultural regions become desert wastelands where soil erosion accelerates beyond any natural recovery rate. The underground collapse spreads through drainage systems, carrying damage from farm to farm. Entire watersheds become uninhabitable. Earth itself becomes poison that kills what it once fed. A deer stumbles through a meadow filled with grass it cannot digest. Her ribs show through skin that hangs loose over shrinking muscle. The abundant vegetation offers no nutrition her body can process. Her stomach swells with plant matter that ferments into gas instead of absorbing into her bloodstream as usable energy. The bacterial colonies in her digestive system produce toxins rather than breaking down cellulose into nutrients she needs for survival. Her body wastes away despite eating constantly. Cattle collapse in fields of green grass that fills their stomachs without providing sustenance. Their digestive systems fail to extract calories from plants that look healthy but lack the microbial processing required for herbivore nutrition. Their farmers watch helplessly as livestock starve, surrounded by apparent abundance. A wildlife veterinarian examines animals whose digestive tracts show inflammation from bacterial overgrowth that prevents normal nutrient absorption. The gut bacteria that once assisted digestion compete with their hosts for resources. They produce waste products that damage intestinal walls. Her patients weaken despite consuming normal quantities of food. Zoo animals refuse to eat vegetation that smells wrong to instincts evolved over millions of years. Their digestive systems reject plants that carry bacterial loads their bodies cannot process safely. Their keepers struggle to maintain animal health when traditional diets become inedible. Herbivore populations crash across ecosystems where plant-eating animals can no longer extract energy from vegetation that grows abundantly. Nutritional value vanishes inside digestive systems adapted to viral bacterial balance. Stomachs stay full while bodies waste away. Something feels wrong with the fruit flies in the research laboratory. A geneticist peers through her microscope at specimens that refuse to evolve. The insects breed for generation after generation without producing a single new trait. Her laboratory colonies produce offspring identical to their parents. The usual random variations in each new batch simply stop appearing. Her research data shows flat lines where evolutionary curves once climbed. The flies she exposes to environmental pressures fail to develop adaptive responses. Their DNA stays locked in fixed patterns and resists induced mutation. Her protocols for studying evolution become studies of genetic stagnation. A field biologist documents wild populations with no seasonal adaptation. Animals and plants that once shifted with changing conditions now stay trapped. Her data reveals species frozen in evolutionary time. The fruit flies keep reproducing in climate-controlled chambers. Each generation becomes a photocopy of the previous one. Genetic diversity is replaced by endless repetition of identical patterns. Laboratory notebooks fill with data points that never change. A marine biologist measures fish that cannot survive in water that grows warmer. Her thermometer registers temperatures that climb beyond their tolerance. The fish swim in increasingly hostile water they cannot escape or adjust to. Her tagged specimens die in conditions their ancestors once learned to tolerate. The fish lack the genetic flexibility that once let populations bend with change. Her research pools shrink daily as limits close in. Coral reefs bleach white under temperature stress. Marine organisms that once adjusted now succumb to pressures they used to endure. Her underwater surveys document wholesale ecosystem collapse. A drought researcher watches plant populations wither under water stress. Vegetation that once shifted toward deeper roots and tighter water use now dies unchanged. Her botanical surveys show extinction instead of adaptation. Fish in her tanks float belly up in water their grandparents would have handled. Genetic adaptation that once moved quickly now crawls too slowly to matter. Her specimens become extinct rather than transformed. Thermometers measure water that kills everything it touches. Infection rates plummet in hospital wards where antibiotics work perfectly again. A pharmacist dispenses medications that cure diseases with single doses. Bacterial infections surrender to drugs that once held no power over resistant strains. Her pharmacy shelves stock antibiotics that eliminate infections with old reliability. Resistance genes that once spread through hospital populations stop moving between strains. Patients recover from infections that would have been death sentences. A surgeon operates without fear of post-surgical infections. Bacteria that once shared resistance traits now stay vulnerable to familiar drugs. His infection rates drop to levels not seen in decades. Emergency departments treat simple infections that respond immediately. Strains that once demanded complex drug combinations now yield to single treatments. Patient outcomes improve as resistance collapses. Bacteria that once outrun new drug development remain stuck with genetic limits. Infections that killed patients despite aggressive care now disappear with minimal intervention. Prescription bottles contain power that bacteria cannot counter. A botanist examines plants that grow smaller and weaker with each generation. Her greenhouse specimens lose vitality that wild relatives once shared freely. The beneficial traits that once jumped between plant species now remain trapped in isolated populations. Her cultivated varieties fail to pick up disease resistance found in wild plants. The gene sharing that once helped crops borrow from wild diversity stops completely. Yields decline as useful traits stay locked away. A conservation biologist watches endangered species lose access to genetic advantages. Close populations carry strengths, but nothing passes across the gap anymore. Her breeding programs strain as diversity drains away. Forest ecosystems show declining health as trees lose access to helpful genes nearby. Old patterns of natural gene swapping collapse into isolated pockets. Woodland communities weaken together. Her greenhouse plants become inbred caricatures of their former selves. When a useful mutation appears, it cannot spread to related species that need it. Plant breeding leans on human effort that never matches nature's old efficiency. Seeds carry only the traits their parents possessed. Blood samples reveal immune systems that weaken over time. An immunologist examines white blood cells that perform worse than their predecessors. The genetic upgrades that once strengthened immune responses have stopped arriving. Her analyses show immune cells losing effectiveness. Helpful improvements used to spread through populations as viruses move genes around. Now those upgrades stay trapped in the first bodies that carry them. A pediatric ward fills with children whose immune systems lack protective enhancements. Variants that once spread fast now remain isolated in individuals. Diseases their parents handled easily return with sharp teeth. Her data documents declining immune function across all age groups. Genetic improvements that once circulated freely become stranded in single lives. Immune evolution through virus-driven gene sharing falls silent. Hospital infection rates climb as patients arrive without the tools they once had. Immune diversity that once strengthened populations is replaced by genetic isolation. Everyone weakens together. White blood cells patrol bloodstreams with increasingly obsolete equipment. Crop dusters release clouds of chemicals that burn through morning air. A farmer watches his fields disappear under toxic fog. The pesticide mist settles on leaves that wilt within hours. His spraying equipment empties chemical reservoirs faster than supply trucks can refill them. The insects that once died from single applications now require doses that kill everything else growing in his fields. His soil absorbs poisons that sterilize earth for generations to come. Children living near agricultural areas develop respiratory problems from breathing air thick with chemical residues drifting beyond farm boundaries. Their lungs burn as pesticide particles settle deep, past what tissue can filter. Neighbors evacuate homes that become uninhabitable downwind from chemical applications. A grocery store manager discovers produce that carries chemical residues detectable by taste and smell. Fruits and vegetables that survive pesticide applications still accumulate toxins. Food becomes unsafe for human consumption. His customers refuse to purchase agricultural products that smell like industrial solvents. The farmer's protective gear cannot prevent skin burns from chemicals concentrated enough to eliminate insect populations that multiply faster than poisons can kill them. His hands blister inside rubber gloves as chemical vapors seep through gear meant for diluted sprays. His fields become toxic waste sites where nothing grows except resistant weeds. Agricultural regions transform into chemical sacrifice zones where the air itself becomes too dangerous to breathe. The pesticide applications that once preserved crops now destroy the land they were meant to protect. Soil drinks poison that seeps through bedrock into wells. Vaccine production lines sit silent in abandoned pharmaceutical facilities. A biotech engineer stares at equipment that no longer serves any purpose. The viral cultures that once filled fermentation tanks have vanished forever. Her manufacturing protocols depend on viral vectors that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. Gene therapy production once used engineered viruses to deliver medications directly into human cells. The work becomes impossible without the viral tools that made precision medicine feasible. Her factory workers find new jobs in industries that don't require biological materials. A cancer patient discovers that treatments which saved her life 2 years ago cannot be manufactured without viral components. Those components carry therapeutic genes into tumor cells. The personalized medicines that once targeted specific genetic defects now exist only in medical literature. Her oncologist offers only traditional chemotherapy that damages healthy tissue along with cancer cells. Pharmaceutical research laboratories empty their freezers of viral samples that represented decades of development work. Biological libraries that held thousands of potential medical applications become worthless collections of genetic information. Nothing can be implemented without viral delivery systems. Her research career ends with the deletion of projects that cannot proceed. Medical schools revise curricula to remove entire courses on viral-based therapies that students will never be able to practice. The treatment options that once gave patients hope for rare genetic diseases disappear from medical textbooks along with the viral vectors that made them possible. Drug manufacturing facilities convert production lines to basic chemical synthesis. They produce medications with limited effectiveness compared to the precision therapies they once created using viral engineering. Assembly lines build pills that cannot reach their targets. Brewery tanks bubble with liquids that smell like rotting garbage. A master brewer tastes beer that burns his tongue with acid. The fermentation that once created alcohol now produces industrial solvents. His yeast cultures produce compounds that make finished beer undrinkable. The microbial balance that once created consistent flavors slips without viral checks. The brewing process that operated reliably for centuries now generates toxic byproducts. Those byproducts corrode metal tanks and burn human tissue. His customers refuse to purchase products that smell like cleaning chemicals. A cheesemaker watches milk spoil into masses of putrid curds that emit gases toxic enough to require evacuation of production facilities. The bacterial cultures that once created complex flavors through controlled fermentation now produce compounds that burn eyes and lungs. His artisanal cheese production becomes a hazardous waste operation. Bakeries abandon sourdough starters that develop into colonies of aggressive bacteria. They produce acids that dissolve bread dough into slime. The fermentation cultures, maintained through generations of careful cultivation, turn hostile without the viral elements that once maintained their beneficial properties. His bread recipes become formulas for creating biological weapons. Yogurt production facilities pour contaminated products down drains as bacterial cultures generate toxins. They replace the probiotics that once promoted digestive health. The fermented foods that formed the foundation of human nutrition for thousands of years become dangerous substances that poison rather than nourish. Food industries abandon fermentation entirely as microbial cultures become unpredictable biological hazards. They threaten worker safety and consumer health through compounds that have no place in human food systems. Fermentation tanks brew poison instead of nourishment. Laboratory incubators hum empty in research facilities that once buzzed with activity. A genetic engineer powers down equipment that will never culture viruses again. The biological tools that built the biotech industry have simply ceased to exist. Her gene editing protocols require viral vectors that no longer exist. They once delivered genetic modifications into target cells. The biotechnology applications that once promised solutions to genetic diseases become impossible without viral delivery systems. Her research grants expire as funding agencies abandon projects that cannot be completed. An agricultural biotechnology company discovers that crop improvement programs dependent on viral gene delivery systems must be terminated completely. The genetically modified plants that once resisted diseases and improved yields cannot be created without viral vectors that carried beneficial genes into plant cells. His company's stock becomes worthless as biotechnology becomes impossible. Pharmaceutical manufacturers abandon drug development pipelines that require viral components for synthesizing complex medications. The biological production systems that once generated life-saving proteins no longer function without their viral elements. Her facility becomes a monument to technological capabilities that humanity has permanently lost. University biotechnology programs close entire departments as professors realize their expertise applies to technologies that no longer exist. The career paths that once attracted students to biological engineering disappear along with the viral tools that made biotechnology possible. Industrial biotechnology facilities convert to basic chemical production as biological engineering becomes a historical curiosity. It stops being a practical science that can solve real-world problems. Laboratories become museums of tools that no longer work. Oil spills spread across ocean surfaces that shimmer with rainbow patterns. An environmental engineer watches pollution accumulate faster than cleanup crews can contain it. The natural breakdown processes that once cleared contamination have slowed to geological timescales. His bioremediation projects fail as the viral components that once accelerated bacterial breakdown of pollutants disappear from contaminated sites. The environmental cleanup that relied on enhanced microbial activity now requires decades instead of months. His restoration timelines extend beyond human lifespans. A water treatment facility discovers that organic contaminants accumulate in reservoirs faster than natural processing can eliminate them. The biological systems that once purified water through viral enhanced bacterial action now operate at prehistoric efficiency levels. They cannot handle modern pollution loads. His community faces permanent water contamination. Landfills leak toxic compounds into groundwater as the bacterial decomposition that once broke down organic waste slows. Rates drop enough that harmful chemicals accumulate faster than they degrade. The natural recycling processes that made waste disposal manageable now fail to keep pace with human waste generation. His environmental restoration projects become multi-generational commitments. Pollution clearance that once took years now requires centuries of natural processing to achieve the same results. The viral acceleration that made environmental cleanup possible has been permanently removed from terrestrial ecosystems. Contaminated sites become permanent sacrifice zones where pollution persists longer than the civilizations that created it. The environmental engineering that once promised restoration now offers only containment of damage that will outlast human memory. Pollution grows faster than nature can digest it. A kindergarten teacher wraps her student in bubble wrap before recess. The small boy touches a playground swing and develops a rash within moments. His skin reacts to metal that millions of children once handled safely. Her classroom windows remain sealed shut to keep pollen out. Pollen sends many of her students to emergency rooms with respiratory failure. Playground dirt no longer feels harmless. A pediatric emergency room fills with children whose immune systems attack their own organs after encountering bacteria that live naturally on human skin. The kids arrive with fevers that spike beyond safe limits. Untrained immune cells lash out at microbes their grandparents coexisted with peacefully. Their parents carry epinephrine injectors for allergic reactions to soap and tap water. Her students wear surgical masks not to prevent infection, but to avoid immune system meltdowns. Airborne particles trigger the collapse. The playground equipment undergoes daily sterilization. Organisms that once taught gentle resistance are scrubbed away. School nurses stock immune suppressants alongside traditional first aid supplies. Children's immune systems strike at everything they encounter with an intensity meant for life-threatening infections. The immune education that once came through childhood exposure is replaced by ignorance that treats every stimulus as an emergency. Classrooms become sterile chambers where learning to live becomes impossible. Thick milkshakes slide through feeding tubes into a teenager's stomach. Her digestive system can no longer break down solid food into usable nutrients. The bacteria that once helped extract calories from meals have turned predatory. Her intestines produce acid that burns through stomach lining faster than tissue can regenerate. Digestive bacteria that once assisted nutrient absorption now consume the very organs they inhabit. She depends on pre-digested liquid nutrition that bypasses normal digestive processes. Her stomach muscles atrophy from disuse as feeding becomes a medical procedure. A nutritionist watches clients lose weight despite consuming endless liquid calories each day. Their digestive systems leak nutrients directly into waste products. Eating becomes pointless when the energy never reaches the body. Their bodies cannibalize muscle tissue to compensate. Hospital nutrition wards expand to accommodate patients whose digestive systems reject all solid food as toxic foreign material. Gut bacteria that once formed symbiotic relationships now turn caustic. They dissolve intestinal walls and poison bloodstreams with digestive toxins. Her feeding schedule requires liquid meals all day to maintain body weight. Her digestive efficiency drops too low to sustain human life through normal eating. The pleasure of taste disappears as food becomes medicine pumped into organs that can no longer process nutrition naturally. Teenagers measure survival in liquid ounces rather than solid meals. Bodies starve while stomachs stay full of solutions. A college student stares at blank paper for hours without writing a single word. His brain struggles to form original thoughts that once flowed effortlessly. The neural pathways that created new ideas have simplified into rigid patterns. His professors assign the same creative writing exercises that previous generations completed easily. His class produces only variations of identical themes. The work repeats without innovation. Thinking follows predetermined tracks like trains on fixed rails. A neuroscientist measures brain activity and sees reduced neural connectivity in subjects born after viral extinction. Brain scans reveal simplified networks without the branching patterns tied to creative thinking and problem solving. His research tracks a steady decline in mental flexibility. Her college courses abandon creative assignments. Students cannot generate original ideas or adapt existing concepts to new situations. Creative work becomes impossible for entire generations. University art departments close as students lose the ability to conceptualize original works that express individual perspectives. Creative thinking that once produced literature, art, and scientific breakthroughs is replaced by repetitive patterns. They generate only slight variations on existing themes. Mental hospitals report increased admissions for conditions resembling advanced cognitive decline in patients whose chronological age suggests peak intellectual performance. Minds become echo chambers that amplify only familiar sounds. Blood tests reveal chromosome damage that accelerates with each generation. A geneticist examines DNA samples that show increasing numbers of harmful mutations. The genetic repair mechanisms that once maintained human DNA integrity have failed completely. Her laboratory documents error rates that climb as each new generation inherits more damaged DNA. Parents pass on genetic material that deteriorates without viral-mediated repair systems. Molecular machinery that once corrected mistakes now lets harmful mutations accumulate like biological rust. A fertility clinic discovers that healthy pregnancies become increasingly rare as damage builds in reproductive cells. Many couples seeking assistance carry genetic loads that make reproduction feel impossible without extensive medical intervention. Their genetic counselors recommend against natural conception. Her genetic databases show declining intelligence scores, physical strength, and sensory acuity across populations born in virus-free environments. Genetic quality degrades through accumulated errors that corrupt essential biological functions. Hospital genetics departments expand to handle increasing numbers of patients born with disorders that earlier generations rarely saw without radiation or chemical toxins. The genetic protection viruses once provided through DNA repair has been permanently removed from human reproduction. Genetic screening becomes mandatory as the chance of producing healthy offspring drops to levels doctors cannot ignore. DNA becomes a copying machine that makes worse copies each time. A construction worker collapses in shade that still feels too warm. His body cannot adapt to temperature changes his grandfather weathered easily. The physiological flexibility that once helped humans survive environmental variation has vanished. His sweat glands produce only dilute fluid that provides no cooling effect. His body loses the ability to regulate temperature through responses that once developed during heat exposure. Thermal adaptation is replaced by rigid physiology that fails under stress. A mountain climber discovers altitude adaptation that once arrived quickly now drags on. Her body never quite reaches functional levels. She lacks the flexibility that once enabled rapid adjustment through cellular modifications viruses once helped along. Emergency rooms treat increasing numbers of patients suffering from environmental exposure that earlier generations tolerated without medical intervention. Human adaptability degrades until routine exposure becomes life-threatening. His construction crew abandons outdoor work during temperature ranges their predecessors considered comfortable. The narrow comfort zone shrinks with each generation. Climate-controlled environments become mandatory for survival as the species loses its ability to tolerate natural variation that once posed no threat. Bodies become prisoners of air conditioning that never shuts off. Identical trees stretch beyond the horizon in perfectly straight rows. A forest ecologist walks through woods that contain only one type of oak. The soil beneath her boots crunches with the sound of a single leaf pattern repeated again and again. Her species identification charts become useless documents. Forest diversity that once required hundreds of pages now fits on index cards. The oak trees that survived the ecological collapse spread through abandoned territories. Like green armies claiming victory, her research plots contain specimens so genetically similar they appear mass-produced. A lumber company discovers that harvesting requires only one type of cutting equipment. Forest complexity disappears under the dominance of species that reproduce faster than their competitors can adapt. Wood grain patterns that once varied between species now repeat endlessly through identical cellular structures. Her trail maps become obsolete as landmark trees vanish under oak expansion. The forest floor that once supported dozens of plant species now grows only oak seedlings. They consume soil nutrients their parent trees release to block competitor establishment. University forestry programs abandon courses on species identification. Biological diversity that once required years of study reduces to memorizing one dominant species. Forests become outdoor factories that manufacture only one product. Soil samples crumble into gray powder that smells like industrial ash. A biochemist examines earth that contains fewer microorganisms than sterile laboratory cultures. The chemical reactions that once recycled nutrients through complex biological networks have simplified into basic decomposition. Her microscope reveals bacterial communities so depleted that soil samples appear lifeless. The underground chemical factories that once processed organic matter into plant nutrients now operate at levels that cannot support vegetation. Her soil chemistry reports read like analysis of construction materials rather than living earth. A farmer discovers that fertilizer produces no crop improvement. Soil that once teemed with beneficial microorganisms becomes biological concrete that prevents root development. The earth now requires complete replacement with artificial growing media to produce food. Her research laboratory abandons soil biology studies. The underground ecosystems that once provided endless research opportunities disappear into chemical simplicity. There is nothing left to investigate. Agricultural colleges close soil science departments. Underground biological networks disappear into chemical uniformity. The living earth becomes dead material that responds only to industrial intervention. Microscopes reveal emptiness, where bacterial cities once thrived. Dawn breaks over forests where no birds sing. A wildlife biologist listens to woods that produce only the sound of wind through identical leaves. The acoustic diversity that once required special equipment to catalog has vanished into ecological silence. Her audio recording equipment captures hours of forest sound with no animal vocalizations. Silence breaks only under wind patterns that vary less than human breathing. Her acoustic analysis software finds nothing to analyze. A nature guide discovers that wildlife tours become impossible. Animal diversity that once provided guaranteed viewing opportunities disappears into empty forests. Movement comes only from swaying branches. Her field guides become historical documents. Animal identification skills that once required years of training become useless in collapsed ecosystems. Wildlife photography that once captured hundreds of species now documents empty landscapes where activity has ceased. National Park Services abandon wildlife viewing programs. Animal populations disappear into ecological voids where former food webs cannot support complex life forms. Biological interactions reduced to mechanical processes that require no animal participation. Forests become theaters where only trees perform for audiences that never arrive. A beekeeper opens hives that contain only empty hexagonal chambers. Wildflower meadows bloom with colors that attract no living visitors. The reproductive partnerships between plants and insects have dissolved into biological meaninglessness. Her honey production equipment sits unused as bee populations disappear into extinction. Flowering plants lose the pollination services that once made reproduction possible. Agricultural crops that depended on insect pollination now rely on wind dispersal, with minimal yields. Her beekeeping operation becomes a museum of obsolete agricultural technology. A botanical garden struggles to maintain flowering plant collections. They cannot reproduce without pollination services, and insect populations have vanished completely. Flowers still produce nectar and pollen, but it serves no function now. Her pollination research becomes impossible. Plant-insect relationships disappear into ecological simplicity, where flowering becomes an evolutionary dead end. Complex coevolution reduces to botanical curiosities that serve no purpose. Seed production facilities abandon natural pollination in favor of artificial techniques. Mechanical procedures produce seeds without requiring insect participation. Reproductive partnerships become historical footnotes in agricultural manuals. Flowers bloom for audiences that can no longer attend the show. A marine biologist drops nets that return empty from oceans where large fish no longer swim. The water samples she collects contain only microscopic life forms that reproduce without predation pressure. Marine ecosystems have simplified into single-layer food webs where nothing eats anything else. Her fishing equipment designed to catch diverse marine species becomes useless. Fish populations collapse below sustainable levels for any predator species, including humans. Marine food webs reduce to primary producers converting sunlight into biomass. Energy no longer rises to higher trophic levels. A commercial fishing fleet discovers that ocean territories no longer provide reliable harvests. They contain only water and microscopic organisms. The marine ecosystem offers only biological soup that provides no concentrated nutrition. Her marine ecology textbooks become historical documents. Predator-prey relationships disappear into biological simplicity. Food web complexity reduces to basic photosynthesis that requires no ecological knowledge. Coastal restaurants close as seafood becomes unavailable. Supply chains that once connected marine ecosystems to human consumption break apart. Ocean productivity now generates only microscopic biomass that cannot be harvested economically. Nets return from seas that feed only themselves.